So Tim Pennings is a professor of mathematics at Calvin University currently, and he used to teach at Pope. That's how I know him, and he was a longtime member of the.
Can you speak into the loudspeaker?
He was a longtime member of the committee that organizes the Muste Lecture. And he and I are also longtime participants in a little discussion group that reads the works of C.S. Lewis and talks about them together. That's how we've interacted most in recent years. So I'm glad he is willing to participate in this and speak about another side of A.J. Muste. Contemporaries, A.J. Muste and Bertrand Russell, opposing worldviews, kindred spirits. So please welcome Tim.
Thank you, Curtis. I came to Hope in 1988, and soon after learned about A.J. Muste and the Muste Committee, and one of, I guess, the foremost kind of person on that committee was Don Cronkite, who I considered one of my mentors, kind of an informal mentor. He was like Muste, had kind of Quakerism in his blood. I just talked with his wife Jane. We were talking last night, and thank you. I'm glad you can be here. But he was an influence on the whole campus, and he really breathed life into the whole Muste Committee and into the whole cause. And I remember he had a T-shirt that he would often wear at these events. And after he died several years ago of Parkinson's, I mentioned it to Jane, and she said, "Oh, I still have it. Would you like it?" Oh. And so, in honor of him, I'll wear that today. It took me a bit to understand it. He said, "Just read it out loud and it'll make sense." Can you see what it says?
Please read it.
What's the first word? I can't see it. Visualize world peace. World peace. World peace. So,
just a bunch of mush.
So anyway, you might think of this, or at least I'm kind of thinking of this, as a bit of an encore to the conference. An encore is kind of a light, short thing towards at the end of it, and all these contributions have been so heavy, and oh man, it's just been a wonderful conference. And this is something a little different. It's not talking about the cause as much as just the man, and in particular the man as compared to another one of my heroes, Bertrand Russell. And as you'll see here in a second, as soon as I saw a picture of Muste, for some reason, I don't know if you'll agree or not, but I just thought, wow, this reminds me of Bertrand Russell, and I was just kind of curious, what do they have in common? So when Kathleen invited us locals to give a talk that we'd like, I said, well, this is something I might contribute, and she said, sure, go ahead. So as I say, it's a little different. It's Muste from the point of view of a mathematician, for what that's worth. Let's see. Which one? There we go. I'm guessing that this slide may speak for itself. That is, it may show why the idea of comparing these two men occurred to me in the first place. Looking at their piercing eyes, their stubborn jaws, Abraham Lincoln said that any person over 40 was responsible for their appearance. That is, 40 years is enough time for one's character to reveal itself physically in the wrinkles, the tilt of the head, the set of the jaw. The fact that these two characters look so similar, it seems to me, may be because there's something similar underneath. Let's explore that idea together. Besides their appearance, it's also worth noting that they were contemporaries. In fact, Russell, who lived to the age of 97, was born a dozen years before Muste and died 3 years after him. I'm guessing that those attending this talk, as it's clear now, are already familiar with Muste, but for completeness, I'll give a short bio of him and then a lengthier one of Russell, and then we'll discuss some similarities and differences. Born in the Netherlands in 1985 and raised in Grand Rapids, A.J. Muste, advisor to Martin Luther King, was heralded by Time magazine, as we've talked about, as the #1 U.S. pacifist. At Hope College, he played baseball, was captain of the basketball team, graduated valedictorian in 1905. He then taught at Northwestern College for a year, and upon graduating from New Brunswick Seminary, was ordained into the then Dutch Reformed Church. Muste's deep knowledge of and dedication to the scripture that he had studied since a child led him to question whether its teaching could be reconciled with the carnage that began with World War I. These questions led to a life of searching and activism, which included spending 8 days in jail at the age of 74 for climbing over a 5-foot fence into a missile construction site. With that as a brief backdrop, you'll appreciate his answer when asked by a reporter, "Do you really think that you are going to change the policies of this country by standing out here alone at night in front of the White House with a candle?" Muste replied, "Oh, I don't do this to change the country. I do this so the country won't change me." I have had that on my office door for 20 years while at Hope. Muste died in 1967, 82 years old. Even that quote shows a deep similarity of the two men. The mathematician, philosopher, historian, ethicist, activist Bertrand Russell was born in 1872 into a prominent British family. His grandfather had been Prime Minister. John Stuart Mill was his godfather. And as a 2-year-old, Bertie sat on Queen Victoria's lap. His parents both died before his 4th birthday. So Bertrand was raised by his paternal grandparents, the Russells, in a house given to them by Queen Victoria. Russell's parents were deists, and in their will they stipulated that Bertrand would be raised as an agnostic. Unfortunately, his paternal grandmother was raised Scottish Presbyterian. They raised him as such, petitioning to change the will. However, they were progressive socially and raised him with a conscience towards social justice. In fact, Russell's guiding theme throughout his life was a Bible verse given to him by his grandmother, Exodus 23:2, "Thou shalt not follow a multitude to do evil." Notice the similarity here to Muste's reply to the reporter, "I'm standing here so the country doesn't change me." Russell certainly is better known than Muste. In fact, one source, I read it long ago and I've forgotten the source, described Russell as the one Brit of the 20th century who would be known in 500 years. It was either 500 or 1,000 years, but labeled him as such. That's saying quite a lot, considering he shared the century with folks such as Winston Churchill. In fact, Russell once met Churchill at a dinner party at which Churchill asked him to, quote, "Please explain calculus in 2 words or less," which Russell reported, "I did to his satisfaction." One can imagine the gleam in their eyes as they enjoyed each other's wit and intelligence. Russell was first and foremost a mathematician-logician. He was Wittgenstein's PhD advisor. You might remember that Euclid first asked the question, how do we know that the theorems of geometry are true? This led to the development of geometry, taking just 5 axioms on faith and proving the rest from these. Russell saw these as an 11-year-old, and his reaction, quote, "as dazzling as first love," may have kept him from suicide, literally. In fact, later in life, he said he considered suicide occasionally, but abstained because he would surely live to regret it. Almost 2,000 years later, Descartes applied the same question to knowledge in general. What do we know for sure? How can we prove it? Leading to his axiom, of course, "I think, therefore I am." And I included just a little bit of this again, just find it kind of interesting. Go ahead. Here's the sentence. "Finished files of the result of years of scientific study combined with the experience of many years." Just as a quick aside, just count the number of F's. Count the number of F's in that sentence. Do it twice or so if you need to, just to make sure. Okay, who found all three of them? Okay, most of you. How many are there?
4.
There's 6. There's 6 in there. There's 3 ofs.
3. Yes.
Isn't that interesting? I use that in many talks when I'm talking about kind of the value of skepticism. Here's another one. You've seen these sort of things before, where one line is longer than the other, or are they parallel? Those I can kind of make sense of. This one here, the claim is, and it's true. What am I going to say? Those 2 tabletops have exactly the same shape. And again, I show this just because it leads to a certain humility. Here it is right here. I had to do it by hand just to prove it to myself. There it is right there. And there it is right there. Right on top. Right on top. So it's just kind of interesting what we think we know when we don't. About 2 centuries after Descartes, and him trying to build up a whole epistemology beginning with I think therefore I am, mathematicians began asking the question, how do I know anything is true in mathematics? How do we know it's true or knowable? This led the logician, in fact, I'm just going to go to this slide. Well, I'll just, oops, okay, yeah. Let me go back once. This led the logician Frege to spend 12 years developing a mathematical foundation for arithmetic and number theory on which the rest could lie. So he wanted to start just like Euclid did by beginning with something that everyone agreed on, something foundational, and build up the rest of mathematics for that. And he began by talking about something very simple, with sets of things. So this, I'll give you just a little history. It's kind of interesting, I think. Back in World War II, of course, the U.S. developed the atomic bomb and used it twice on both Hiroshima and Nagasaki. And then much sooner than we expected, the Soviet Union both developed, through the use of spies, of course, the atomic bomb and also the hydrogen bomb. So hence there was this technological war, as it were, between the 2 nations. And then we, the United States, thought we were ahead until what happened? Sputnik. And suddenly they were ahead. And this caused a shock to the U.S. And among other things, it was decided we need to develop mathematical understanding and intuition early on in childhood rather than waiting until, whenever, graduate school. So this is the sort of thing, it's basically called the new math, which is what I learned in about the 7th grade, is how old I was, but it's just simple stuff. It's a Venn diagram, and you have one set is a subset of another one. If everything in here is also in here, given 2 sets, you can talk about the intersection of the set, is the things that are inside. So it's very simple stuff, and this is what Frege used as his foundation of mathematics. So that's just one I found on the web that kind of illustrates those ideas. Here's another one that I found right next to it, which I thought I'd include. And now I'm kind of embarrassed to include it, especially after Peter's talk last night, but I will. What's going to show up here? Now you're really curious. But look at this one. Here's intelligent design, religion, stupidity, fundamentalism, religious politics, Republicans, and so on, the Dark Ages. So anyway, I'll get rid of that one. But anyway, it shows the hubris that you were talking about, that liberals tend to think towards the conservatives. So anyway, here's what happened with Frege. As I say, he spent 12 years trying to build up mathematics from just numbers and arithmetic. And once he got to this point, he gets this letter from our friend Bertrand Russell. And as I said, some sets are subsets of others. And Russell asked him this question. He said, a friend, some sets, like the set of all glasses, is not itself a glass. But the set of all ideas is itself an idea. So some sets are actually contained within themselves. And so he asked this question. He said, the collection of all the collection of all sets which don't contain themselves, does that set contain itself or not? Sorry, this is from a mathematician. Okay? Does that set contain itself or not? Now, you can't unpack that, but what you can understand is a nice analogy to it. It's as if you're in this small little town and there's several barber shops on Main Street, and one barber shop proudly has a sign on the window. They're both barbers are men, and the barber shop sign says, "I shave all the men and exactly the men in town who don't shave themselves. If anyone doesn't shave themselves, that's the person I shave." And someone comes by and says, "Well, that can't be right." And why can't it be right?
Is it himself?
Who shaves the barber? He says, if the person doesn't shave themselves, I shave them. If they do shave themselves, I don't. So who shaves the barber? So it's that sort of internal contradiction that Russell found in this naive, it's called naive set theory, just a simple set theory. And Frege, for his part, puts a foreword to his second volume. It says, "A scientist can hardly meet with anything more undesirable than to have the foundation give way just as the work is finished." In this position I was put by a letter from Mr. Bertrand Russell as the work was nearly through the press. I mean, it's a lament. And here's something I think from the New Yorker. The arithmetic seems correct, yet I find myself haunted by the idea that the basic axioms on which the arithmetic is based might give rise to contradictions which would then invalidate the computations. I've tried that a few times at a restaurant. I've never gotten very far with it. Okay. So anyway, all of this, getting back to Russell, was no joy for Russell as a man who spent his teens rejecting the Christian faith, rejecting free will, life after death, and becoming an atheist by the age of 18, he wanted to find certainty in mathematics. So he and Alfred Whitehead began their own 13-year toil, actually it was longer than that, beginning with logic this time, to found a foundation for mathematics. And here is just one page of the book. This is his 20-year masterpiece. This is page 360 of the second volume, and notice it's at the end of this page that he finally gets to, from this proposition will follow 1 + 1 is 2. Okay? Totally bona fide. Okay? So if nothing else, at the end of this conference, you now know this, or at least you know it if you believe all that. So there you go. So
Can I ask a question?
yeah.
At what point does he define arithmetical addition, since it needs to be defined before we can conclude that 1 + 1 is 2?
Well, yeah. So he started with just the basic principles of logic. So at that point, it's just symbols of logic. And well, here to answer your question, here's his quote. Okay. In fact, I think I have it up here. So I'll let him answer that. So listen, here's the lament again. I wanted certainty in the kind of way in which people want religious faith. I thought that certainty is more likely to be found in mathematics than elsewhere. But I discovered that many mathematical demonstrations which my teachers expected me to accept were full of fallacies, and that, if certainty were indeed discoverable in mathematics, it would be in a new field of mathematics with more solid foundations than those that had hitherto been thought secure. But as the work proceeded, I was continually reminded of the fable of the elephant and the tortoise. Having constructed an elephant upon which the mathematical world could rest, I found the elephant tottering and proceeded to construct a tortoise to keep it from falling. But the tortoise was no more secure than the elephant, and after some 20 years of arduous toil, I came to the conclusion there was nothing more that I could do in the way of making mathematical knowledge indubitable. So he admits, I mean, it's considered successful in the sense that he started with logic and built it up, but it certainly is not, there's nothing intuitive about it, there's nothing simple about it. No mathematician who does mathematics ever reads his book to make sure that they're on a solid foundation. So this, let's see. This arduous work was just one of Russell's accomplishments. He won the Nobel Prize in Literature in 1950 for his 1945 work, History of Western Philosophy. He wrote extensively on ethics, philosophy, education, religion. The Llewellyn Library has a stack of books so high. One of his best known is Why I'm Not a Christian. This one here. Here's one in praise of idleness. Very interesting. Among other things, he asked the question, during World War II, half of Britain's whole effort of the economy was spent towards the war, and yet people still had enough food and everything else, and said, if that's the case, why can't we just have 20-hour work weeks and spend the rest of the time in arts and whatnot? Yeah, I mean, a really interesting argument. Here's one called Unpopular Essays, and the preface to this just shows a little bit of his personality. Okay, here it is. A word as to the title. In the preface to my book, Human Knowledge, I said that I was writing not only for professional philosophers, and that philosophy proper deals with matters of interest to the general educated public. But reviewers took me to task, saying they found parts of the book difficult and implying that my words were such as to mislead purchasers. I do not wish to expose myself again to this charge. I will therefore confess that there are several sentences of this present volume which some unusually stupid children of 10 might find a little puzzling. On this ground, I do not claim that the essays are popular, and if not popular, then unpopular. So that shows a little bit of his personality and why he was described as having died after a lifetime of disagreements. And again, I'm kind of curious if we have any discussion after this, just to what extent. I talked to both of his grandsons last night, just to what kind of a guy was AJ with regard to such things. Maybe not quite so much. And then finally, his autobiography has what I call a position paper. At Hope College, every senior takes a class called a senior seminar, in which they write at the end of it a life view paper, which is kind of their philosophy of life. And I used Russell extensively both in my first year seminar and in my senior seminar. So this is, I actually included in both packets. And this is his life view paper. And it's just a couple paragraphs. Some of this in particular, I think of AJ again when I hear some of this. Here's what Russell writes. 3 passions, simple but overwhelmingly strong, have governed my life. The longing for love, the search for knowledge, and the unbearable pity for the suffering of mankind. These passions, like great winds, have blown me hither and thither in a wayward course over a deep ocean of anguish, reaching to the very verge of despair. I have sought love first, because it brings ecstasy so great that I often would have sacrificed all the rest of life for a few hours of this joy. I've sought it next because it relieves loneliness, the terrible loneliness in which one shivering consciousness looks over the rim of the world into the cold, unfathomable, lifeless abyss. I have sought it finally because in the union of love I have seen in mystic miniature the prefiguring vision of the heaven of saints and that saints and poets have imagined. This is what I sought, and though it may seem too good for human life, this is what at last I have found. With equal passion I've sought knowledge. I have wished to understand the hearts of men. I have wished to know why the stars shine, and I've tried to apprehend the Pythagorean power by which number holds sway over the flux. A little of this, but not much, I have achieved. Love and knowledge, so far as they were possible, led me up to the heavens. But always pity brought me back to earth. Echoes of cries of pain reverberate in my heart. Children in famine, victims tortured by oppressors, helpless old people, a hated burden to their sons, and the whole world of loneliness, poverty, and pain make a mockery of what human life should be. I long to alleviate the evil, but I cannot, and I too suffer. This has been my life. I found it worth living and would gladly live it again if the chance were offered me. It's good to know that he did find love at last. He was married 4 times and practiced open marriage, having had many lovers, some simultaneous, throughout his life. In fact, he was terminated from the City College of New York. Who was I talking to last night about that? I can't remember. Because he held and wrote immoral views on sex and marriage, including sex before marriage, homosexuality, and open marriage. He died in 1970, as I say, after a lifetime of disagreements. So there's a snapshot of Russell. The differences between the two men are obvious, both in their lifestyle and in their religious beliefs. But I thought, what are given these significant differences? What are some of the ways in which they are similar? So here's just a few that came to mind. One is, most strikingly, most importantly, they were both pacifists. Lifelong conviction for both of them, extending from World War I to the Vietnam War. For Russell, and this is why I asked him the questions I did about Muste, Russell said that World War II was a great evil, but Nazi domination was worse. And so in that regard, he was willing to bend to being, if not a just war, at least a necessary war. Muste, as we saw, not. Which one of them said this? Quote, "For love of domination, we must substitute equality. For love of victory, we must substitute justice. For brutality, we must substitute intelligence. For competition, we must substitute cooperation. We must learn to think of the human race as one family." It was Russell, in fact. Yeah, it was Russell. So it could have been either. Okay, could have been either. I imagine these two men, meeting together. I'm sure they didn't, or at least I don't know that they did. But maybe coming to blows over some of the things they disagreed with and getting into a fist fight. These two pacifists. Wouldn't that be interesting? But
It probably would have been a verbal fist fight with bad puns and
a second way, both men spent time behind bars multiple times for their convictions. As we saw above, and has been mentioned several times here, Muste spent 8 days in jail as a 74-year-old for climbing over a missile site fence and was beaten and jailed for his pro-labor demonstration and organization. Russell equaled this record. Already in World War I, Russell found himself dismissed from Trinity College, Cambridge, and in jail for his protests. When he was 89, Russell participated in an anti-nuclear demonstration. Given his age and who he was, the magistrate, this is in Britain, offered to exempt him from jail if he agreed to quit. Russell's response, "No, I won't," and he spent the next 7 days in jail. Both men, interestingly, met with Russians or Soviets and were unimpressed. Muste, of course, had his meeting with Trotsky and came away disillusioned. Russell met Lenin and was disappointed. He said that Lenin was like an opinionated professor. That's what he compared it to.
No.
Both were strong students themselves and advocates for liberal arts education. Of course, Muste was valedictorian and other, his speech and various things. Russell, as they say, was at Trinity. He became interested in elementary education in particular, and he began a Beacon Hill school for early childhood. More to their core, they both had a lifelong search for truth that led to changed beliefs. I was just thinking during the talk this morning, Nietzsche has a quote, only he who is willing to change is my kin, something to that effect, but to be Nietzsche considered only worthy people who are willing to change their views. Of course, Muste, let's see, this willingness led Muste to modify his original religious beliefs to things more liberal, to, of course, change his emphasis to pacifism and such. Led Russell to completely jettison his belief in God early in life and the supernatural, and then more dramatically, as we saw, to change his beliefs about the simple, easily found truths of mathematics. And both remained open and searching their entire lives. And then finally, kind of tying in with this, Leon Kass, does that name ring a bell with anyone? Does it? Okay, yeah. He visited Hope years ago. University of Chicago, professor, author, doctor, chosen by George W. Bush to lead the stem cell issue. He wrote a book, Towards a More Natural Science, in which one chapter of it is entitled Morality and Mortality. And this is a quote. This is a quote from this essay with regard to the whole aging process. He says, most of us cease to look upon the world with fresh eyes. Little surprises us, nothing shocks us. Righteous indignation at injustice dies out. Many of us become small-souled. Our noblest ambitions begin to flag. In many ways, perhaps in the most profound ways, most of us go to sleep long before our deaths. Not so with Russell and Muste. This Muste quote in an interview for The Atlantic in 1952 is equally true of both of them and accounts for the character shown in their countenance. Quote, he said to the interviewer, I am prepared to change my beliefs about the state of the world, but not my hopes. About that, I wish to remain constant. And he suggested the title, 80 Years of Changing Beliefs and Unchanging Hopes. I think it applies to both of them. Thank you. So Curtis, maybe we could either take questions now or just fold them in to the end. Either way, it doesn't matter.
Well, we have a couple. We can take a couple minutes now, I think.
Hi, thank you so much for that talk. It was amazing. I think another point of contact between Muste and Russell is, Russell was a very vigorous anti-nuclear activist. So the Russell-Einstein Manifesto, I don't know if you're familiar with that.
No.
Okay, so anyway, there is a thing called the Russell-Einstein Manifesto, which is a statement against nuclear weapons.
Oh, yeah, okay. Yeah. Thank you. Other things that come to mind as you learned a little bit about Russell. It's an honor to be here among all these people who know Muste so well. Anything else? I think, there's another.
You make me think of C.P. Snow. There are two cultures. There's science culture and then there's humanities. And increasingly, they're divergent in the 20th century. STEM is becoming triumphant. But you sort of illustrate this common ground or a harmony between them somehow, sort of mystical harmony that I think is increasingly lost on us. But for Russell and Muste, they just had a natural inclination toward it, perhaps.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah. True.
I think they probably did know each other. What David McReynolds had said is during the Albany incarceration for 52 days of these peace walkers that were trying to just go through town and leaflet, that Muste was down there doing his work, AJ was doing his work, and David Reynolds and the other office staff were reaching out to Bertrand Russell for help. So they had to have worked to some degree for mutual purpose.
Boy, that would be fascinating to find if there was any,
Let's go to Swarthmore.
yeah.
Ah, it's in the archive, yeah. Well, let's thank Tim,
Yeah.
and then we'll carry on.